strange, isn't it? Almost how like your monetary system affects the kind of person you become. And one of the things I've noticed big time, Jimmy, been being in this space now full time for like a year, is there's a lot of hope, a lot of optimism, a lot of creation in this space. Whereas, like you said, that when you're in the fiat money system, it's almost like you're trying to game the fiat money system. So you always hear of ever since we were kids, the real estate investor, I bought a house and I borrowed this money against it and I flipped my house and I did this. And you're always thinking, well, how does this work? This is a weird video game, right? And so it values you if you can game the fiat system. Again, I went to work on Wall Street from MIT and ended up making 10x what I could have made as a mechanical engineer for Ford Motor Company. Why? I was like 24 years old and a vice president at the First National Bank of Chicago when I moved from New York City. And it was like, okay, I was really good at trading fixed income derivatives, but was I creating more value there than I would have in manufacturing at Ford? I don't know. I guess I was in the fiat system, right? And so therefore it rewarded me and I repeated that behavior. So it's an interesting point you make about how that system itself can bring out the type of humans we want. But I guess it makes sense because if, again, you're being rewarded a bit like Munger and Buffett, right? They're being literally rewarded with cash and accolades because they are very good at this fiat system thing. And so, of course, they value it and they stick with it and they do more of that. If they were potentially in that Bitcoin system, they might behave very differently, right? And I guess this is the essence of what it is, this future human behavior.
Yeah. And I mean, think about just like pre-Federal Reserve System, like the people that we used to look up to and honor. You had like, the Einsteins and the Edisons and Teslas of the world, right? Inventors, people that were thinking and trying to figure out like new ways to see the world. I mean, I guess maybe Rockefeller a little bit because, he basically changed the entire oil industry and figured out how to make it. He created Standard Oil and all of that. But these were the people that were admired because they created a good or service to the market that was desperately needed. Nowadays, it's people like Munger, and Buffett, and the people that run hedge funds that make 30x their money. Have they actually made anything with their hands, like ever? Like, have they created companies? I mean, once in a while you get the Sam Waltons of the world. I guess people admire Zuckerberg and Sergey Brin and other people like that. But I mean, most of the time it's the investment managers that people admire. And it's like, okay, the values have completely shifted because of the underlying money. And the monetary system has changed the incentive so much that you're honoring people that really haven't done that much. I mean, yeah, Buffett like brought a bunch of insurance companies together. He has real estate holdings and like furniture companies and, owns a bunch of stock. He knows how to trade, but that's not really creating a good or service the same way, say Thomas Edison did with, like General Electric and, creating all of these wonderful things. Like that tells me more about the monetary system then versus now than anything else.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, Jimmy. I was actually just, like I said, in Boston a couple weeks ago with my daughter looking at universities, and I stopped by MIT, and out on the outside of the walls, like you said, it's like Newton and and all these people that had these incredible game-changing ideas that brought about like huge magnifications in what we were as a human species. But like in today, if you go on Instagram, like you said, it's usually someone flexing their jet, or like you said, it's a BlackRock partner, or it's something. And also we've kind of become a victim of what we value most, I guess, which is that kind of fiat currency, which has now got out of control. And so we kind of value the people that somehow game that system. And I guess it all ends like the Romans to a certain extent, right? Where they continue to devalue, maybe get debauched. And I'll just, on that point, how do you see this fiat system or the dollar system ending? Because that's always interesting. A lot of people talk about it, but also it's hard for me to see it ending anytime soon, even though, like you said, these crises are happening more often with literally exponential size printings. But how does it end?
Hmm. That's a great question, and I think we can learn a little bit from the lessons of the Weimar Republic, even what's happened in Zimbabwe, Venezuela, and many others. But generally, there's some sort of like crisis of confidence, and that's I think we're getting there. I don't know if we're quite there yet with the monetary system, or there's certainly like a political crisis almost everywhere. There's a lot of movement towards populism in most countries where they want a little more they tend to go a little more nationalist and maybe even isolationist to some degree, but they're sick of like jobs flowing outward, for example, and that's something that at least in the US has happened over the last 50 years. All manufacturing has essentially gone overseas. And this is something that you can predict with fiat money printing, with central banking. And if you study Richard Cantillon, who was an economist from like 1720, and he noticed, he was observing the Bank of England, which is the world's first central bank, and said, well, here's what happens is all the manufacturing jobs go elsewhere because labor is just cheaper. And that's essentially what's happened to the United States. Most manufacturing has gone out, and you're not going to be able to bring those back until the money reforms. And that's not something that a lot of people really understand or have figured out. They like the role of the dollar and the ability to print money essentially at will until the world gets saturated with it, or there's some sort of like crisis of confidence. But I do see something like the Ukraine conflict doing something, right? Because what we saw with the Ukraine conflict is essentially the financial system completely said no to Russia. And in doing that, it undermined its reserve status because they essentially seized all of the Russian assets. Now, you might think that they're deserving of that or whatever, but when you take something like that away, well, Russia is no longer going to be on the dollar standard ever. And a lot of their allies are not going to be on there. And, you see Europe paying for all of the gas that Russia is providing in rubles, and the ruble is stronger than ever because of the dynamic that's just sort of happened. That reserve currency status, I think, starts crumbling, partly due to this particular conflict, but I think there will be more, especially if we get into any sort of conflict with China over Taiwan or something like that. That could really destroy confidence in the US dollar. And then at that point, it's kind of a gradually then suddenly thing. We will see the structures of the US dollar hegemony sort of like crumbling. And then all of a sudden it'll be, okay, we'll be on to something else. Now, that could be another fiat currency. It could be gold. It could be Bitcoin. I think Bitcoin is inevitable eventually. But when that happens, how that happens, that's more a geopolitical, macroeconomic question. And it really depends on sort of specific things that happen. But yeah, I think it'll happen in the next 20, 30 years, something like that.